Absolutely. If there's one thing I want listeners to leave this conversation firmly convinced of, it's that these two aspects of a person fit together better than the neurotypical mainstream could ever imagine. Like, this is a match made in whatever place peanut butter and jam first met each other.
Welcome to Making Polyamory Work. Hi, I'm Libby Sindak, and I want to thank you for being with me today. I'm a queer polyamorous mom and an integrative relationship guide, and I'm committed to helping people who live in love outside the status quo have extraordinary relationships, because relationships are at the core of our well-being as humans. I think love is why we're here and how we heal. Today, I have a special guest. I am welcoming on Making Polyamory Work Alyssa Gonzalez, who is a biology PhD, public speaker, and the author of Non-Monogamy and Neurodiversity, which is her first published book. Alyssa also writes fiction, and she uses science fiction and fantasy elements to explore social isolation, autism, gender, trauma, and the relationships between all of these things. Her nonfiction writing ranges from molecular biology to urbanism. And she lives in Ottawa, Canada, with a menagerie of pets, and can confirm that when we had our call, I got to see many creatures in her space. This episode is part 1 of 2 of Alyssa's and my conversation, because as it turns out, the conversation about non-monogamy and neurodiversity is a rich one, and we definitely don't even come close to covering everything that I would want to cover. But I got so many questions from listeners to talk about the intersection of non-monogamy and neurodiversity. And I'll just say that there are 2 things that are true, which is that, as Alyssa points out in this episode, non-monogamy and neurodiversity kind of go together like peanut butter and jelly. And also, being neurodivergent makes all relationships a little bit challenging, and so having more relationships and more complexity has its own unique challenges for non-monogamous folks. I am just so thrilled to be introducing you to Alyssa if you haven't encountered her before. And so let's just dive in, shall we? Part 1 of 2 on non-monogamy and neurodiversity. So today on Making Polyamory Work, I have Alyssa Gonzalez joining me here today. And together we're going to answer a listener question. But before we do that, Alyssa, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. I mean, I've already introduced you in the intro, but I always like to let people speak a little bit about themselves. What would you like folks listening to know about you?
Hi, well, my name is Alyssa Gonzalez, and I'm a happy cat owner, in addition to having a biology PhD, a career as a writer, a large collection of Beast Wars Transformers, and let's see. Oh, and I wrote a book. In case all of that didn't imply enough, I am also autistic.
Yeah. And y'all can't see it, but I can see that Alyssa has a feline friend that has been making some appearances in our call, which is great.
Yeah, this girl knows when I'm on camera, because I don't usually talk to myself while sitting at my desk otherwise. And she likes being on camera, don't she?
Well, cool. Well, I'm so glad that you're here. And it's been really nice getting to know you. The last time we talked was really great. And I was like, we should absolutely have you on the show. So the main reason why I invited you here was because I did get more than one actually question from a few listeners, just like wanting me to talk about being neurodiverse and being non-monogamous or polyamorous, and like, how do those 2 things go together? And I think that's come up because I've disclosed that I am myself not neurotypical, and how that it has been an evolving process for me. I'm sure it has. I think I've heard that it has for you too. Sort of been an unfolding. I think maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, one of my friends suggested that I might have ADHD, and I was like, but I'm not hyperactive. So, and then I started looking into, and I have great attention span. Then I started looking into what it really meant to have ADHD, and it's a very poorly named diagnosis.
Exactly.
So I looked into it,
Yes.
and then I started to checking all the boxes, and so I talked to a therapist, and she was like, "Yep, that sounds all accurate."
Mm-hmm.
So I have that going on, and then a few years ago, one of my children started having some difficulty at school, and we were like, "Oh my gosh, are we bad parents? Like, what's going on?" And then, ultimately we started to understand that, his brain worked differently, and we started looking
Mm-hmm.
into autism spectrum disorders and really started understanding, oh, no, his brain just works differently. and
Mm-hmm.
and this is how it works. And then we started looking into the criteria for that, and then basically me and all of my partners kind of were going, well, that kind of sounds like us. So,
Yeah, we find each other.
yeah, that's assortative mating. We do assortative mating. And yeah, so we are in assortative friending as well. And so yeah, so
Mm.
I think everyone in this house is some flavor of neurodiverse. And so here we are. And so I think since I've disclosed in various
Mm.
formats that I am not typical, uh, other folks have been like, "Oh, would you talk about that?" And I was like, "I would love to, but I would love to bring someone else to talk about it too." So here's Alyssa.
Oh, it's an honor and a privilege.
Yeah, well, I guess I'd love for you to share a little bit about,
Mm.
where you're coming from on this.
So I've always been pretty dang weird.
Same,
Uh,
hard same.
uh, and it wasn't until well into adulthood as my friend circle started to take a certain shape, and people were like, you should think about this because you keep saying you're not one of us, but we think you're one of us. And then I looked into it more, and I'm like, oh, that explains so much. I can stop rereading the pages on Wikipedia about various personality disorders now because I finally have a name for the thing. Okay, okay.
And I'm curious, and you can pass on this
Hmm.
question, and we can edit it out if you don't want to answer. But are you self-diagnosed autistic, or are you diagnosed by a psychologist? It doesn't actually matter to me,
Hmm.
and I'll go ahead and disclose I'm self-diagnosed,
Hmm.
but and I still think I'm pretty autistic. But I guess I'm curious how you really came to truly fully accept that about yourself.
So I am self-diagnosed. I did extensive reading on the experiences of other autistic people online, self-diagnosed and otherwise, and found a great deal of similarity there. I found their advice for how to deal with a neurotypical world instructive, and as someone coming to that realization as an adult, there is very limited value to being formally diagnosed. There just isn't that much out there I would have access to with a formal diagnosis that I couldn't get by just reading the same stuff I read to figure myself out. And on top of that, as an immigrant navigating Canada's immigration process, being formally diagnosed would have been a sizable demerit that would have greatly complicated my arrival in this country.
Wow.
Uh, did not pursue that.
Yeah.
Missed out on some potential accommodations in academia while I was still pursuing my studies as a result. But I got to stay in the country, so I'm gonna take that deal. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's
Hmm.
exactly how I feel about
Hmm.
self-diagnosis, which is that I mean, it really depends on what
Hmm.
you're using it for, whether
Hmm.
that matters or not. And I mean, I would say
Yeah.
for me, same deal.
Hmm.
Like for me to use strategies that work for autistic people, for me to think
Hmm.
about my brain in a particular way, for me to support myself and ask
Hmm.
for the support that I need, I don't actually like need a formal diagnosis because like what is that going to
Hmm.
give me? Like you said. Now, if I was going to go back to school and I wanted some Americans with
Hmm.
Disability Act
Hmm.
accommodations, sure. And and my kid, he does need accommodations. And at the same time, I feel complicated even about that because sometimes when you slap a label on somebody, then they just start to see everything you do and everything you are in a particular way. So
Hmm.
it's a complicated thing for him. But I think for the most part, like it's something we all kind of wear with pride around here.
Hmm.
So
Definitely.
yeah. Well,
Hmm.
so you've written a book,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
just to reiterate again, it is called
Uh, Non-monogamy and neurodiversity, more than two essentials guide.
yeah.
Hmm.
So in that book, you're talking about how neurodiversity and non-monogamy can go together. And, and that's what my listeners were asking about. So can we get into that? Can we start talking about how those two things go together, when they do, when they don't?
Absolutely. If there's one thing I want listeners to leave this conversation firmly convinced of, it's that these two aspects of a person fit together better than the neurotypical mainstream could ever imagine. This is a match made in whatever place peanut butter and jam first met each other. It's like we as neurodivergent people gravitate toward all sorts of non-mainstream things. Look at every quote unquote weird hobby community. You'll find us by the truckload. Like it's just how it works. The mainstream that proves day in and day out that it is not for us and doesn't particularly want us. And from there, we make our exits to all sorts of non-normative communities, whether that means we turn out to be furries or Ren Fair enthusiasts or people that collect Warhammer 40K figurines or people who are really into fantasy football or whatever the weird hobby of the day is. Mixed in those non-normative communities are things like not being monogamous. We are the exact people best positioned to figure out just how absolutely bizarre the social structure of monogamy as a social institution is. And to think that, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't work for most of us. Everyone hates that part, but also hates the people who point that out more for some reason. And in between all that, we figure out, like, wait, we could just not do that.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, I mean, what I hear there is in your mind, it's not just that, yes, you can be neurodivergent and polyamorous or non-monogamous, but that in your mind, it is a really good fit. Like it's a really, it is a relationship style that would be really, really, really fitting for folks who are just not typical how they think and how their brain works.
Exactly. It is just an extraordinarily natural fit for so many of us. And a big part of that is that all these social heuristics that the neurotypical people can just sort of quietly internalize and not even realize they've done it. That doesn't really happen for a lot of us. Even if it does, it can just not feel right for a lot of us because we can see the places where they don't really work necessarily.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like I feel like I mean, this is my experience at least, and you know what they say, you've met one autistic person, you met one autistic person, but my experience has always been like, if you say one thing, but then you do another thing, I have a real hard time with that, right? Or if you say this is really great, but then I'm watching it and I'm going, doesn't look great. I'm not capable of like holding something that clearly seems untrue alongside, just because everybody else is saying it's true. And I think that is a feature of a lot of non-normative folks. I mean, it's like, when someone asks you, hey, Alyssa, how are you doing today? You know what you're supposed to say, right? You're supposed to say fine.
Yep.
But I have to work like super overtime to say fine because you just asked me a question. How am I doing today? Well, actually, I'm like exhausted and there's a lot going on. And, and really, I just want to lie down right now. And I'm a little overwhelmed by, the attacks on trans and gay rights in my country, but nobody wants to hear that. They just want to hear fine.
Yeah.
But they asked, they asked.
Yeah, my mental compromise is to have like a sliding scale of mental honesty depending on how much longer I want them to keep talking to me.
Yeah.
From not so bad to, and here's the screwed up thing that happened to me today.
Yeah. But I feel like there's so many things like that. Like you said, these unwritten rules that we're expected to follow.
Oh, so many.
We're like, but like you're literally asking for the thing that you don't want. And then you're expecting us to just know not to do that thing. and it doesn't compute I want to say I can hold and the capacity for unspoken rules. I really can, especially if it has been spelled out to me at some point. I have the ability to say, okay, that's an unspoken rule that we're going to follow here. Cool. I can do that. But it's when it's an unspoken rule that doesn't make sense, doesn't seem to serve anybody, and I'm still expected to do it and not talk about it, to your point about what you said, like, if you talk about it, people get annoyed with you.
Yeah, it's all so absolutely bizarre. Like, why does the neurotypical mainstream want me to stop looking at the other beautiful people out in the world if one of them is holding my hand? Like, I don't have enough hands. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, and so I guess like let's dig a little deeper here, because one thing that you said that I really liked was you said it in a couple different ways. First of all, you said that those of us who tend to be on the autistic spectrum or tend to be and I think that folks who have ADHD fall into this category too, that we tend to be weird, we tend to be weird in some other ways, not just weird in the fact that, like, we don't pick up easily on social norms, and the ones that don't make sense to us, maybe we don't want to do. But like, there are other ways in which we're weird. And what I'm hearing from you is like that there's this journey of sort of embracing your weirdness, as opposed to telling yourself that you need to squeeze into some previously defined package of what a human is supposed to be, and what you're supposed to want, what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to love. And I guess this might be, because I'm just making up that people listening might be somewhere on that journey. They're thinking about non-monogamy, right? That one of the things that might be holding them back. In fact, I actually had a friend tell me this one time. I was telling her about, I invited her to a party actually with a bunch of my poly friends. And she hit it off with one of them and was thinking that she might date this person. And then she looks at me and she goes, "But Libby, like, all of y'all are so weird, and I just want to be normal. I'm worried about being too weird." And I remember distinctly her fear of, like, if I get too connected into this community of people, then I'll lose, like, access to some of the privileges of being perceived as normal. And I guess I'm wondering, I don't know, what do you think about that?
As someone who has rarely felt like she had access to any of that, we make do. I'm never going to get invited to whatever kinds of parties the people who wear polo shirts and then have a sweater on their back tied in front. They're never going to invite me to their parties. I don't even know what I'm missing on that front.
Unless it's a costume party, right?
I shudder to imagine a party where that is the costume someone would wear. Far too scary. So, I mean, hypothetically, that person could be missing out on, like, whatever high-level networking the super rich white people manage, if that person is too goth in public or whatever. But I never had access to any of that because I'm Hispanic and my family is in an awkward middle income area, and I was entirely too weird, even from a very young age, to get into any of those social spheres. But I'm doing okay for myself, and not trying to hide my weirdness meant that when people actually wanted to be around me, that it was people who wanted to be around me and not some pretend person that I was constructing for other people's benefit so that they'd keep inviting me to parties where caviar gets served or whatever it is this person's afraid of.
No, it's interesting that you equate normalcy with, well, whiteness. You didn't say whiteness, but I would say that's probably true. And wealth. I think that's real interesting.
I'm just trying to imagine what this person could be afraid of losing.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, she really likes football. I don't know. But I mean,
I refuse to believe that the person who invented fantasy football was neurotypical.
Well, I don't think she likes fantasy football. I think she just likes watching football, and hockey. She likes hockey a lot. But I mean, I'll tell you, long story short, she's totally embraced all of those things, non-monogamy, I think the last time I checked in with her, she was like, yeah, I think I'm autistic. So, I mean,
Yeah, we find each other.
We find each other. We do.
Yeah, we don't so much get diagnosed as become autistic by peer review, near as I can tell.
No, but maybe we should, right? Well, and I think that particularly people who are in the like millennial / older millennial / Gen X generation, like the diagnostic criteria for autism changed while we were like teenagers or older or younger.
Yeah.
But before we were like in the zone to really have that aspect of our selves noticed and acknowledged.
Yeah.
And also it, the way the even the current diagnostic criteria doesn't necessarily take, I don't know if I would have been picked up as being noticed that I had any problems.
My grades were entirely too good.
Yeah,
They kept evaluating me over and over again, and like, no, this person's not broken enough. What are you talking about?
Well, right, because it's a deficit model. But when we were looking at a diagnosable, we're calling it a disorder rather than a difference. We're calling it, you have to have enough things wrong with you and enough challenges to get the diagnosis, because the point of the diagnosis is to get accommodation, instead of it just being a tool to help you understand yourself and understand your place in the world and how you can care for yourself and ask for care from others. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that gets me to one of the ways in which the non-monogamy as a model for thinking about relationships is particularly well suited for a lot of us, because the mainstream makes a lot of assumptions about what relationships are supposed to look like. We're supposed to be a certain amount of engaged with each other and only each other. And then after a couple of years of that, you ask them to enter into a legal union that might merge your households and finances, and you move in together. And some amount of time after that, you start putting your gametes together too, and just it's just this escalation, and there's this expectation whenever you reach one step that you're going to reach the other ones, unless something goes horribly wrong and the whole relationship falls apart. And like, I don't want other people living in my house forever. I'm very particular about where all the things are and whether I have access to the bathroom.
Well, and I think the important point about that is it's all non-negotiated, right? It's all sort of expected.
Exactly.
And, I mean, even in mainstream, like, I work with a lot of couples therapists who, work with, monogamous couples, more conventional relationships. And, one of the pieces of advice, even amongst, the most normative of normative couples, is take some of those implicit agreements and make them explicit.
Yes.
Because, what you think might be cheating, for example, might not be what your partner thinks is cheating. Like, I was dating a guy who thought cheating was me going skinny dipping in a hot tub with my friends if there was anybody there of the opposite sex.
Yeah, they're always like that.
Which is hilarious because I'm not straight. So like I'm queer. So it wouldn't, for me, the gender of the people in the hot tub don't matter. And also like what people observe of my physical form has nothing to do with, but anyway, it was a whole thing. We did not last. That relationship did not last. He's a sweet guy, but it was not for me.
Yeah, but quite frankly, the people whose concept of cheating cares about what gender your company is are innately biphobic, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, and well, I mean, by erasing as well, it's just assuming. Yeah, whole thing.
Yeah, it just plays into that meme that goes around sometimes, like, we don't have friends, only prey.
I like that. It's funny. Well, and I mean, so I think the point you're making here is that because when you're doing non-monogamy, there are no more assumptions, right?
Exactly. You've blown all the heuristics wide open, and now because none of them apply anymore, some of them are just outright incoherent when you try to apply them to this kind of model. Everything has to be explicitly laid out. You get to figure out what's actually important to you and what your hard lines are, which ones aren't, what different models of how to organize all these things might work. Like, that's amazing. Like
Mm-hmm.
it is difficult to overstate just how incredible that is, and how much the fact that this is just how it has to work in a model this non-normative translates to therapists have to tell all the neurotypical couples to be more like us to make them function better.
Right. Isn't that funny? But it's true. It's really
Mhm.
true. It's really true. A lot of the, like you said, a lot of the
Mhm.
things that
Yeah.
um couples therapists teach their couples is like how to explicitly negotiate, how to say what you
Mhm.
want out loud instead of just
Exactly.
hinting around and hoping they'll pick up on it. And
Mhm.
it's hilarious. But yeah, like if you want to be in a non-normative structure,
Mhm.
there you can't be implicit about stuff, at least not initially. You can be implicit
Mhm.
about it once you've developed your new, what did you say, heuristic? Like once you've developed
Yes.
sort of your new rubric of like, this is how we do
Mhm.
things, you get to
Exactly.
have some expectations that maybe this principle would also apply over here, but
Mhm.
then but you've co-created that,
Exactly.
that way of functioning, that system and how it's going to work.
Mhm.
And for my brain, good Lord, like just having things spelled out
Mhm.
is so important because there are so many ways in which people give mixed messages, where people were raised, from in different cultures, and so they just have
Mhm.
different unspoken things have different meanings depending on where you grew up, how much unpacking of patriarchy you've done, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And so just to have it all spelled out, I'm like, whew, thank God.
Yeah, it is such a relief, especially when it's all a replacement for social rules with weird implications that never made a whole lot of sense in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
Getting to not only find other people that are willing to meet you where you actually are instead of expecting you to climb hand over fist on off up the side of the mountain of other people's nonsense. It's just it's so beautiful. And
Well, do you think that
mhm,
because we're coming
mhm,
into
mhm,
relationship expecting things to have to be negotiated and expecting that we're going to meet
mhm,
everybody's going to try to meet each other where we're at instead of, like you said,
mhm,
one person having to
mhm,
conform to a norm. Do you think
yeah.
that that means that there's a greater
Mhm,
willingness to be accommodating
mhm,
to like when I think about like what you're saying about like
mhm,
I don't want to
yeah.
live with a partner forever.
Mhm,
Like I don't want
mhm,
the requirement for me to be in partnership with someone to be cohabiting, because that doesn't work for me, or it doesn't
mm,
work for me right now.
yeah.
And
Mhm,
do you find that then when you have kind of the smorgasbord of different types of ways of relating, that people are more accepting of that as a limit? Like, I don't want to live with people, and
mm.
people don't go, oh, well, then I'm just going to write you off. And instead you find people who are like, awesome. Me
It
neither. I don't want
it
to live
is yeah.
with either.
It is much, much easier as a very out neurodivergent person to find other people with similar hangups. And in non-monogamy, like very few of us are living in like grand polycule communes with everyone that any of us is dating. And it's if you start diagramming who's connected to who in a polyamorous arrangement, there's a lot of people with only one line connecting them to the rest on the outside, because that's how people meet. That's how networks of human contact work. So almost by necessity, people are going to date people that aren't currently living in their homes, and where causing them to start living in your home is going to be impractical. So there's an acceptance that this is just part of the package in a non-monogamous setting. Some people deeply idealize getting all their partners under one roof, and as someone who's generally not necessarily connected to everyone that my partners are also dating, it boggles my mind that other people can make that model work, but like just out of sheer logistics. But if it works for them, I'm delighted. But for a lot of us, non-monogamy presents this amazing opportunity to not have the expectation that being in love with someone means you're planning on sharing a home in 3 years.
Well, or any of
Hmm.
those kind of assumptions, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, but I think what you just said there kind of speaks to, I
Hmm.
don't know how much this comes up for you when you're talking to
Hmm.
people or who are new or considering
Yeah.
non-monogamy, but a thing that I've run into is is kind of what my friend said initially, which is like, I'm worried if I'm too picky or if I have too many non-normative needs or if I'm too different, then that means I won't be able to find somebody who's willing to do that with me. You know, we say to ourselves, like, relationships are about compromise. We all have to sacrifice to be with people that we care about. And so we might not get everything we want. And I mean, I've seen this a lot, people being afraid to like fully be who they are because they're afraid that that's going to mean that nobody wants them, you know? And what I heard from you is that actually the more I am myself and the more I'm loud about it, the more I'm able to find people who dig that about me and who are interested in creating the kind of relationships that I can actually live happily in. And I just, that's how I feel too, that like, if you shine your light about who you really, really are, bright as hell, it is going to repel a lot of people. There are going to be people who are going to be like, oh, I definitely want to live with someone, so that's not a good fit for me. Or I'm definitely don't want that many animals in my house, like, or whatever, right? But like, if you shine who you are really brightly, then the people who are looking for someone like you are going to find you. And that means you'll repel all the people that wouldn't have been a good fit anyway.
Demographics can mean both versions carry truth, especially in places where the local dating pool is relatively small, and the polyamorous dating pool is always a lot smaller than the monogamous one. For now.
For now. Wow. I'm just kidding.
This can lead a person to having to reevaluate which of their lines should be as hard as they currently are. But one of the other beauties about establishing a non-monogamous relationship is that the pressure for one person you find to suddenly be all the things you're looking for is dramatically lower.
Right.
And you get the potential to indulge different aspects of yourself with different people. And the ones you find might be super into not having to be the one person who does that thing that you do with your other partners. Maybe this person you mentioned earlier who's really into football will find a partner who does not find football interesting, and a different one who wears a football helmet everywhere because they're that into football. And I don't know what people who are into football are like. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I don't really either. I was only excited about the Super Bowl because Rihanna was doing the halftime show. And then I just watched the YouTube of that the next day.
And that's how it's done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and I feel
Super Bowl is that time when commercials are briefly interesting, right?
Well, and I feel like we're in a time now actually where, you know, because of technology, because of the internet, like even if we can't easily find each other at the local bar or whatever. I mean, I've literally never met a person that I've dated at a bar, but apparently this is a thing that people do. But like, even if you can't meet, you know, the right fit for you at the local bar or at the village square or whatever, you have the opportunity to put yourself out there and be real clear about who you are online. And sometimes it might be, you know, on an app and you're able to find all of the people who, you know, resonate with what you're looking for, especially as the apps kind of get more specialized. I don't know. I'm curious what you think of that, but I'll get to that in a minute. But then also, like, I've heard so many stories of people finding each other long distance and then changing where they live so that they can be together. And I think that's really interesting. And I guess I'm you know, because I do think that fear of, well, if I fully embrace this part of myself, unless I already have a primary partner that I'm doing this with, which that is one group of people that are like that. But I think it's important to think about the people who are not like that, who are embracing this just in and of themselves, and they're taking a risk. You know, I'm going to say I'm non-monogamous and I'm going to put myself out into the dating pool, and I already feel like I'm a weirdo. You know, am I going to be narrowing my dating pool further? Maybe instead you'll be able to, like you said, find more people who can be a network of support for you, and also find different people who have your special interests. Because you know, finding someone where all your special interests are going to line up, that shouldn't even be allowed. You know.
that's when you get neighbors complaining that the level of enthusiasm in your house is too high. And could you
Or that
be
you
less
just,
happy about everything?
yeah, well, you just never leave. You'll never go outside. And I guess that might be a joy for some people. Like, finally, I don't have to leave the house anymore. But I guess
Mhm,
I guess I'm curious what you would say about how the role technology has played for you in being able to feel more comfortable about
mhm.
these aspects of yourself.
I'm not convinced I would have figured out a lot of things about myself without the internet in the forms it has taken in the various years I've been using it. Goodness, it's taken a lot of different forms in the years I've been using it. Uh, it's once I figured out that social media profiles are a great big giant billboard of all the stuff you want people to know before they start talking to you. I That made it so much easier to screen the world for people that are would actually find it interesting to continue talking to me, so I don't have to spend 20 minutes figuring out that I don't enjoy their company individually. I don't
Hmm.
have time for that.
Yeah, who does? It's like
Mhm,
a endless job
mhm.
interviews.
Pretty much.
And also giving people
Mhm,
like repeated opportunities to reject you as
mhm,
well. And I don't know about you. I do not have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, but a
mhm,
lot of neurodiverse folks do. And for those who don't know what that is, it is
mhm,
what it sounds like. It is just a deep sensitivity to any kind
mhm,
of negative feedback from another human being. Like, none of us likes it. Nobody enjoys
mhm,
rejection. But for people who have RSD, it can be like completely dysregulating to experience rejection.
mhm,
So I can understand like what you said, like being able to give people the opportunity to reject you, but not be in front of you and give you the
mhm.
opportunity to reject them, before they're in front of you saves a lot of time, but also some heartache.
Absolutely, and RSD is one of the big neurodivergent challenges that we bring to non-monogamy for a lot of reasons. On top of non-monogamy being a reason to keep on putting oneself out there even after they've successfully partnered, and therefore exposing one to that many more possibilities for rejection.
Hmm.
Being non-monogamous requires a lot of potentially tense conversations about heavy emotional topics because we can't rely on any of those heuristics from earlier and have to co-create our personal realities.
Hmm.
And that can be tense. That can be challenging. Receiving feedback one doesn't like in that sort of conversation can be quite destabilizing for someone who is inclined to react very strongly to negative feedback.
Hmm.
So this is a field of human activity where having some coping mechanisms for RSD is very important. Like there's not really any getting around that.
Yeah. What do you know about what has been supportive for people who have RSD, who struggle with that? Or even just don't
Uh,
like rejection and have a like you said, or like, wait, I have to put
mm,
myself out there and then keep putting
mhm,
myself out there and keep putting myself out there. And then also deal with my
mhm.
partner putting themselves out there and feeling that discomfort.
Uh,
Ooh.
the putting oneself out there is more or less optional. Like
Hmm.
there's no poly council that's going to vote you off the island if you don't collect enough partners fast enough or anything like that. Like,
That is true.
yeah.
That is true. That's important for people to know. You can be
Mhm,
polyamorous and only dating one
mhm.
person. That is
Yep.
Polyamorous is a way in which you want to relate, not
Mhm.
necessarily the structure you have to be operating on. I mean, it's both, but yeah.
Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, anyone who can become aware that their partner is seeing someone else and not pitch a fit or try to end the relationship over it has already escaped the worst strictures of what monogamy is in our society, regardless of what they are or aren't doing with other people.
Hmm.
Hmm. So so that's one big thing that like, if it feels like too much trouble to keep looking for more, like you don't have to. Like
That's true.
you could decide it's not worth it, and maybe you're even right. Like this is your emotional landscape. You get to prune it however you please.
That's true. That's true. Well, before
uh,
we go into some of the
mhm,
challenges, because RSD is
yeah.
definitely a challenge,
Mhm,
and also some strategies on how to overcome some of those challenges. I guess I'm
mhm,
curious if we can loop back to
yeah.
if there's anything else that you can think of that our reasons why you would say non-monogamy or polyamory and being neurodiverse go really well together. I mean, we've talked about like having to explicitly negotiate things, people who like to explicitly negotiate things and have special interests being drawn to each other, being able to find people who are willing to meet you where you are, accept you as you are, and you understanding that that's your job too, instead of us twisting ourselves into a pretzel to make a relationship that we're just not made for work. Is there anything else that you'd say this is a hardcore benefit and this is why you should really consider? I mean, because it sounds like you're almost an evangelist. If you're not neurotypical, maybe you should consider non-monogamy. Maybe that would be the best thing for you, is what I'm hearing.
Not at all trying to increase my dating pool.
I mean, I do think that you do have the polyamorous agenda, it sounds like. I'm for it. How do I sign up for your campaign fund? Anyway, carry on.
I appreciate that. So another big benefit I find is neurodivergent people get a lot of unpleasant reactions from the mainstream, especially when we're younger. And a lot of it comes down to not really respecting our autonomy. We're often considered too weird to have our wishes respected. And there's a lot of parents of neurodivergent kids who haven't heard that word in particular, who think that if they're just rude and unpleasant enough about the weird stuff their kid wants, their kid's going to stop wanting it, or at least stop saying it out loud. And there's just this general sense for a lot of us that we don't really get to exist as fully independent people with control over so much as what side of the sink our toothbrush is on until we're living alone. And that's when we get to, finally have light fixtures that don't burn our eyes or flicker us into headaches. And when we get to not have the blankets that make us all scratchy, and all this long list of little things that when people we live with don't respect us, we just have to suffer. And then you move out for university or your first job in a new town or whatever, and you're finally living by yourself, and you are now the curator of your entire personal space. That is a level of freedom that is very difficult to compromise with later after enduring all of that. And so inviting someone else to become long-term part of your space or leaving that space behind to join theirs can be profoundly disorienting, because you have to figure out then how much of them are they allowed to express without it being an infringement on you. And in the standard monogamous relationship escalator model, you just have to deal with that because they expect that you two are going to live together. And if you don't put that option on the table, that means you're not serious about the relationship, and they have social approval to abandon you and look elsewhere.
Yeah.
But in a non-monogamous model, a lot of the time you living with them isn't on the table anyway, because their kitchen table only has so many seats around it. And you're allowed to insist on maintaining your own home either way. Like there isn't this same expectation that you have to live together at some point if the relationship is serious. You can have a partner for decades and have both of you maintain your separate homes because that feels right for both of you. Yeah. And so you get to have the hard-won freedom that you were not getting when you had parents that didn't think that your unusual wishes were worth respecting. You get to have the kind of home that that one girlfriend you had said you would have to stop having because she likes to have loud music on while she's cleaning or whatever. Your space gets to be your own in ways that it can't be if you have a long-term person in your home who also has it as theirs.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like what you're talking about here is coercion, self-coercion, and acceptance of other people coercing you into living in a way you don't want, because of norms, right? So it's like if you're exiting norms anyway, you can say no to any kind of coercion, and that doesn't mean you don't compromise or negotiate, because sometimes you do. Exactly. Sometimes, you put on headphones when your girlfriend wants to have loud music in the house. Like, then your girlfriend doesn't make fun of you for having the headphones because there's mutual respect.
Exactly.
For each other's needs. And it is so interesting that you and I would be in the same boat, that we would equate monogamy with that kind of coercion, but because monogamy is the presumed norm, and it comes with it all these other presumed norms, which you laid out.
Yeah.
it is coerced, right? Because we're shown, we're told it's the only option. And so it's compulsory, the same way heterosexuality is compulsory, the way some people feel like parenting is compulsory. Although parenting is an interesting one, because I feel like compulsory parenting, but also like zero support for actually being a parent. So making it like extremely unattractive. But so, you know, if you exit the paradigm that it's okay to coerce someone to live in a particular way based on a norm, then you get to take care of yourself. And you get to invite other people to take care of you, and you get to take care of them in the ways that work for them. And it's a full respect relationship.
Exactly. And but I don't want to imply that a partnership that consists of only two people can't have any of this level of respect. It's more in a model where people already have to negotiate everything and there's acceptance of not doing things by normative ways. A lot of this conversation has already been had. And so it's much shorter and less involved, whereas it's something of ours that the monogamous end up having to bring into theirs.
It's so true.
To try to have this kind of thing in their model.
It's so true. I mean, that's actually, it's funny. One of my favorite couples therapists, well, that one that I've trained under and learned a lot from, you know, what he talks about a lot is full respect living, not having a power over dynamic in relation. And he traces it back to patriarchy, basically, you know, men having dominion over the world and over women. I mean, I would trace it back even further. I would say it's also rooted in capitalism and because we are definitely coerced in our jobs, in other aspects of our lives. Basically, like you said, from the time we're young, this idea that you can have power over and compel people to want different things, to like different things, to be a different person. That's kind of woven into our society. And people, I think you're right. I think a lot of people who are in monogamous relationships don't like it either. I don't think coercion has any place in intimacy. And in fact, coercion, I think, disrupts connection. It either disrupts connection to another human being or it disrupts connection to yourself or both.
Oh, yes. So much.
And of course, there are tons of non-monogamous and polyamorous folks who still operate under a coercive model. They will feel entitled to coerce each other. But by not doing that, you get to be you.
Very much. And in our specific case, a lot of it comes down to the social baggage that the neurotypical world likes to inflict on us, where we get rejected over and over again, not just from intimate situations, but from any kind of social inclusion at all. And then by the time we find someone who's willing to show us any measure of kindness or even interest in having us around, we feel like we have to do whatever it takes to keep them around. Because the alternative is the yawning chasm of loneliness that we all remember from when we were small. And it doesn't have to be that way. It just absolutely doesn't. We're allowed to assert what makes an environment for ourselves that is better than that.
Well, I think what you just said there is so important that I want to stay with that for a second. What you said there is, because if you're not neurotypical and you're living in a neurotypical world, you've been experiencing some form of social relational rejection, either within your family of origin or socially at school or myriad of places, that when you finally do find someone who is willing to, like, quote unquote, put up with you, you'll self-betray to stay with them. Like you'll try to squeeze yourself into a pretzel to make yourself acceptable, and you'll feel grateful for the opportunity to do it because that feels better than being alone. And yet it's so not. I just want to say it's really so better than being alone. Being alone is way better, even though being alone is also very hard. And it's very, I mean, one of my teachers said this so beautifully last week. She said that other human beings are our biome. Like, we are really designed to be in community. And for those of you who don't understand autism, if you really have a misunderstanding about what it means to be autistic people are just like everybody else. We all need human connection and we crave it. Very capable of empathy. We're very capable of intimacy. And in fact, in some ways, some of the things that get in our way is an abundance of empathy, an abundance of taking in so much emotional data from everybody that we get overwhelmed, and then we don't know how to respond appropriately. but it's not but it's not a lack of desire to be in community. And so being able to be with people who can allow you to be yourself and create a space that accommodates you is like you said, I mean, it's the best of both worlds. It's the holy grail. I get to be loved, and I don't have to destroy myself in order to be with someone.
Exactly. I can be around someone who gets excited when I go on a 20-minute info dump about what the thing I'm excited about right now, because they know what it means that I came to them with this.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh gosh, man.
Put it in my veins.
Okay, I think that's a solid case for why non-monogamy would be a good move if you are neurodiverse. So that was a bit of an abrupt cutoff, I know, but we have to split this episode into 2 parts because there was just so much to talk about, and I do not like 1.5-hour long podcast episodes. I know some of y'all do. It's just not for me. So we're going to leave it here. Stay tuned next week for part 2 of my conversation with Alyssa Gonzalez. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any thoughts about what I've said today or a question for the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Instagram as that Polyam Mom, or you can reach me on my website, libbysindback.com. I'll also say, if you are loving my podcasts but looking for more support, this is something I do professionally. I help individuals, couples, and groups have amazing relationships, and you can find out more about my offerings on my website. Thank you so much to everyone who has loved this podcast, who has shared with me their love for it, who has shared it with their friends and their networks and their Facebook groups. And thank you so much for subscribing. And especially thank you so much if you have rated and reviewed the show, because that helps more people find it. Making Polyamory Work was created by me, Libby Sindback. It is edited by Finn of the Normalizing Non-Monogamy podcast and hosted on the Spotify podcasts platform. Van de Leon manages the website and posts the transcripts.